Imagine we're 5 years in the future. I'm out of undergraduate school and most likely in grad school or out in the workforce. But no matter where we are, we're all facing the same economic decisions. Will we be able to pay back our student loans on time? Can we afford to buy a new house, or should we stick with an apartment? Can we afford to buy a new car, or should we stick with that old junker we've had since high school? Well, these and many other decisions will require us to take a very careful look at our personal financial health and to decide which options are most feasible for us. But the big question is whether or not we'll choose those options that are most feasible or the ones that we want the most. You see, we as human beings have the tendency to want things that we can't afford. We take on mountains of debt in order to furnish our lavish lifestyles. Ultimately, we're most likely not able to pay back all of that debt, and many Americans found out the danger of this kind of behavior in 2007 when they began defaulting on their loans, forcing them to face foreclosure and even bankruptcy. The credit crisis had begun, and living beyond one's means became a dream once more. As our recovery slowly continues, the big question is, what should we as consumers do to help? Many economists have suggested that we should increase our level of consumption in order to spur an increase in growth. This follows the logic that higher consumption leads to higher GDP and ultimately a higher standard of living. An idea close to this is that increasing our spending will increase our level of well-being, and dangerously close to that idea is that spending in general brings us happiness. If we continue to increase our spending again, how long will it take before we're right back where we started, living beyond our means and with mountains of debt? Spending has indeed been on the increase for decades. The Bureau of Economic Analysis, a division of the U.S. Department of Commerce, indicated that spending has risen from approximately $1.8 trillion in January of 1959 to almost $9.4 trillion in January of 2010, and that's adjusted to the 2005 dollar. But just because we're saving more doesn't necessarily mean that we're better off. According to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, the division of the U.S. Department of Labor, the unemployment rate in the U.S. is currently 9.7%. That means almost 10% of people that want to work right now cannot find a job. Are we really better off? I mean, poverty levels are rising, the income gap is widening, and overall disapproval toward our government is intensifying. Maybe spending isn't the best way to rescue our economy. How then can we bounce back from this recession and ensure that our economy does not again become dependent on spending and enslaved by debt? The answer is saving. By saving now and planning for future spending, we will see a sustainable and healthy recovery. Dr. Robert Frank, an economics professor at Cornell University, has said that we would grow more rapidly the more we save and invest. The more we save, the more we invest. The more we will be able to fund new inventions and boost productivity, which are both engines of growth. Other economists have suggested that increasing our savings will decrease dependence on foreign and domestic borrowing. Thus, savings is a direct avenue for long-term growth and decreases our need for taking on debt. How then can we convince everyone in America that saving is the way to go, especially when the government continues to tell us to spend, spend, spend? Well, this task may not be as difficult as it seems. Data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis has been compiled to analyze trends in the percentage of personal income that people save. Since the early 1980s, the savings rate in the United States has generally been on the decline. However, in nearly every recession since 1960, the savings rate has experienced an increase, and this current recession is no exception. The savings rate has climbed from around 1.6% of disposable income in the middle of 2008 to almost 5% of disposable income in 2010. The recession seems to have frightened consumers into spending less and saving more, as roughly 6 in 10 Americans now say that they prefer saving to spending, according to a recent Gallup poll. But history tells us that this trend will most likely be a temporary shock. How then can we ensure that this increase in saving is permanent? Well, people need to understand the value of saving. So what does saving actually do for us? I mean, we've already discussed that money doesn't buy happiness, but I think we can agree that it does grant us a sense of satisfaction, at least at first. So saving, in a sense, allows us to achieve that sense of satisfaction without having to take on debt. By saving, we create a pool of wealth that serves two basic purposes. The first is investing for increased earnings in the future, and the second is allowing us to plan for future spending based on the wealth that we've accumulated now. Ultimately, we'll have more money in the future, and we'll be well equipped to make responsible financial decisions, unlike much of America before 2007. Consider this: if all those people who had spent money on houses that were far more expensive than they could afford sat down and really planned out that expense well in advance, they could have dramatically decreased the cost of the expense and the amount of debt that they had to take on. The housing market would have experienced far fewer foreclosures, the credit market would not have taken a nosedive, and the economy would not have experienced as deep a recession, if it experienced one at all. If people continue to increase their savings and begin planning for future expenses, then the U.S. economy can be saved from future debt-initiated recessions. Reliance on credit to pay for major expenditures like college, cars, and housing will decrease. Thus, the potential for borrowers to default or fail to pay their loans will decrease. The amount of foreclosures and bankruptcies in the U.S. will also fall. People will begin spending based on the money that they have now, and not based on how much they can squeeze out of their credit companies. Thus, Americans will start living within their means, and the threat of repeating this horrible recession will be alleviated. Maybe we're not thinking 5 years in the future, and maybe the idea of paying off student debt or buying a house seem far off or unimportant right now. But I can guarantee you that these things will be very important 5 years down the road. Now, I'm not saying, especially if you're still in school, that you should go out right now and pick which house you're going to live in 5 years. What I am saying is that you can start putting yourself in better financial position to afford these kinds of expenses in the future. And there are a couple of simple things that you can start doing now to put yourself in a better financial position. The first, if you don't have one already, open up a personal savings account. Really, all it takes is about a half an hour down at your local banking branch, talking with a representative about your personal financial well-being right now and the fact that you want to open a savings account, and they can set you up with one. Remember, at a bank, walk-ins are always welcome. Second, you can start saving now. Especially if you have an income already established, I suggest that you start putting away a designated percentage of each paycheck directly into your savings account. Even though the average right now for the U.S. is around 5%, I challenge you to put away 10% of each paycheck or more. Think about it. You'll be on your way to owning that car you've always wanted twice as fast as the average American. Now third, if you don't have an income right now, you can still start putting money away. Putting just $1 into your savings account a week will leave you with $52 more at the end of the year than you would have had if you blew it all on that thing you stumbled upon while studying for finals. And lastly, if you're going to have a summer job, I suggest that you plan on putting away at least half of your earnings. Think about it. Most of us would probably put that money towards a vacation with our friends. But is a week-long trip to the Jersey Shore really worth an entire summer's worth of work? Now, I'm not asking you to forfeit all of life's pleasantries. I'm simply asking you to help yourselves. And all you have to do is save. Trust me, you'll be glad you did. Sure, money can't buy us happiness. But the idea of being in control of our financial futures, of being able to plan our spending on our own terms, and of being debt-free could bring a smile to our faces, or at least to our pocketbooks. Thank you.